lies, deceit, espionage, and the theft of highly classified government intelligence. These are the characteristics of the topic of today's discussion, the Cambridge Five. The scandal of the Cambridge Five is probably the most prominent and damaging intelligence disaster that the United Kingdom has ever had. This group of 5 graduates of Cambridge University, recruited while students and traitors to their country, passed on vital information to the Soviet Union from the end of World War II and even into the early stages of the Cold War. But our story begins years prior, in the early 1930s. Arnold Deutsch is a professor at Cambridge University. But unknown to his peers at the prestigious college, Deutsch had other motives than just educating young minds. He was young and idealistic. He would lecture his students on the benefits of communism and how only communism could bring Britain out of the economic crisis that they were experiencing at the time. However, few knew that he was actually working for the Soviet Union, with a mission to recruit the brightest minds that Cambridge had to offer to become spies. It didn't take long for Deutsch to find his first target, a young man by the name of Kim Philby. Born in Ambala, Punjab, British India, Harold Adrian Russell Philby was the son of Dora Johnston and St. John Philby, an author, Arabist, and explorer. St. John was a member of the Indian Civil Service and later a civil servant in Mesopotamia, an advisor to King Ibn Saud of Saudi Arabia. Nicknamed Kim after the boy spy in Rudyard Kipling's novel, Kim, Philby attended Aldro Preparatory School, an all-boys school located in Shackleford, near Godalming in Surrey, England, in the United Kingdom. In his early teens, he spent some time with the Bedouin in the desert of Saudi Arabia. Following in the footsteps of his father, Philby continued to Westminster School, which he left in 1928 at the age of 16. He won a scholarship to Trinity College, Cambridge, where he studied history and economics. He graduated in 1933 with his degree in economics. At Cambridge, Philby showed his leaning towards communism, in the words of his father St. John, who went on to write, "The only serious question is whether Kim definitely intended to be disloyal to the government while in its service." Philby was also entrenched in many social circles at Cambridge. This made Philby the perfect recruit for Deutsch, because all Deutsch had to do was recruit one. And then Philby was able to use his influence in the social life at Cambridge to meet, befriend, and recruit 4 other students: Donald MacLean, Guy Burgess, Anthony Blunt, and John Cairncross. All of the students were more than just political rebels. They were rebels at heart. 2 of the students, Burgess and Blunt, were homosexual at a time where intercourse between 2 consenting adults of the same sex was illegal. Donald MacLean was bisexual. John Cairncross and Kim Philby were both heterosexual athletes. By 1937, each of the Cambridge Five had graduated from Cambridge University. At the time, the looming threat of the war provided opportunities for them to distinguish themselves. In 1937, Kim Philby went to Spain to work as a journalist. In Spain, Francisco Franco, a nationalist general, is struggling to take power and overthrow Republican rule. Joseph Stalin didn't trust Franco and wanted him assassinated. So Philby was given his first mission: assassinate Franco. But with tight security and the support of a nation's people at Franco's back, how could Philby get close to him? Well, As luck would have it, while Philby was traveling close to the front lines of battle, a Republican shell landed near his car, critically wounding all passengers in the vehicle. The wounded Philby became an instant hero in Spain and was awarded by Franco himself. However, by this time, Stalin had changed his mind about Franco and called off the assassination that would have no doubtedly ended his spying career. Little did the Soviets know that keeping Philby in their back pocket would pay mass dividends for them in the coming years. With World War II ratcheting up in a bolsterous fashion, the Cambridge Five were quickly thrown into high positions of authority, which gave them access to the most important classified information for the Second World War. While Philby was overseas working as a journalist and getting in good with the people of Spain, the other members of the Cambridge Five were back in London working their ways up the social and political ranks. Guy Burgess was working at the BBC's radio station, where he had daily contact with powerful and influential world leaders. Working as a talk show producer for the BBC, he was able to talk with and invite these powerful people onto his show. While he had these people in his presence, he took the opportunity to entertain them and really integrate with that class of society. Burgess had been trying to persuade Winston Churchill to give a half-hour talk about the Mediterranean. As a result of the Czech crisis, however, Churchill canceled the talk, but instead invited Burgess to Chartwell to speak with him. Burgess accepted the invitation and arrived on October 1st of 1938. A play entitled The Turning Point, written by Michael Dobbs, has Benedict Cumberbatch taking the role of Guy Burgess. This play has a very accurate representation of what might have happened during this meeting between the two minds.
Ah, you mentioned Monsieur Pofoufa.
Fifer.
A friend of yours. I recall now some gossips, idle tittle-tattle around the Travellers' Club. He's...
That's right. He's a Nancy boy. A left-hander.
Heard a strange story about how he likes to play table tennis, your Monsieur Pofoufa. Ping-pong. Apparently, he uses a naked youth as a net.
Yes, well, the French have their subtleties.
And he is a friend of yours.
Yes, he's a friend.
I think I begin to understand.
You understand nothing. If a man plays bloody ping-pong with his left hand or uses his prick as a paddle, what the hell difference does that make anymore? Will none of us make old bones, not once Hitler arrives? We'll all be damned for the simple sin of being British, each and every one of us. It's not our fault being Englishmen or Scots or hairy-ass Welshmen or even wayward Irish for that matter, but what a wonderful, joyous accident that has been up until now. Your father would have understood. And now I see he was right. You're not up to it, are you? Not fit for purpose.
Well,
oh, I know I'm not fit for purpose either. The Navy decided that when I was barely 13, but there's one difference between you and me, Mr. Churchill. One that should make you hang your head in shame. I'll die in disgrace, of course, up against a wall or in some stinking gutter somewhere, condemned for being what I am. But your dishonor will be the greater for failing to live up to what you are, Winston bloody Churchill. I don't want to die. But if I have to die, let it be for something that I believe in. For the love, not of myself, but of my country. This beautiful corner with all her faults and for all that one day she could be.
Now, you're the one who seems to have made a speech.
You dare sit in judgment on me?
I don't.
I disgust you.
No, I am not entirely an innocent in such matters. After all, I went to Harrow. And these are dark days when the normal rules of modesty no longer seem to apply. Jews, gypsies first, and then the rest of us. after the mentally retarded and the morally dubious. That's how they're going to start, the first step along the road. Then all of us, close behind in serried ranks, just as you say, for the fault of being Britons.
Condemned for what we were all born.
I refuse to judge a man for his private diversions.
Of course, how else could you still worship your father? But he's dead, and his reputation rots, and there's nothing you can do about it unless one day he's remembered for one thing above all else, that he was the father of a great man, one of the greatest that this country has ever bred.
You seem to have extraordinary faith in me.
A faith you once shared.
Young man, if I could harness your passion...
There are millions of us who hate or will come to hate Hitler and everything he stands for, who want nothing more than to simply know that we're not alone, who would follow you, not blindly, but because they see the same thing as you see from your window here.
Fight them, you said, the Huns.
In France.
In the air, and on the seas and oceans. On the beaches, on the landing grounds, if it comes to that. In the fields, and in the streets, and in the hills.
No surrender, Mr. Churchill.
Never, never surrender. We make a strange confection, the two of us, like oil and vinegar.
You need nothing more than a bloody good shaking.
Which you have provided. I have enjoyed our conversation. Permit me to give you a token. A copy of my latest book. My speeches. I know they're only words, but...
Something to live up to.
As you say, as you insist. Winston Churchill. 1st October, 1938. Forgive me, young man, what did you say your name was?
Burgess. Guy Burgess.
Mr. Budgies, you are a remarkably perceptive man. In my opinion, your talents are wasted at the BBC. You should apply them elsewhere. And if ever I am in a position to assist you with an introduction to the Foreign Office or one of the intelligence services, perhaps, be sure to let me know. I hope to hear more of you.
May we both live long enough.
Goodbye, young man. Goodbye.
He and Churchill spent several hours together, and Churchill presented Burgess with an inscribed copy of the latest volume of his speeches, Arms and the Covenant. Soon after this encounter with Churchill, Burgess joined the British Secret Service. By 1939, it was clear that Britain was close to war. Stalin had entered a pact with Adolf Hitler. This caused many supporters of communism to forego their support of the Soviet Union. They recognized this move as Stalin's personal opportunism and a sign that the Soviet Union didn't truly follow the utopian ideals that they championed. However, even after this betrayal, the prideful and arrogant Cambridge Five could not admit that they had made a mistake. Their intellectual arrogance and their prideful nature would eventually be their own undoing. In the spring of 1940, Britain began the largest military enlistment in their history. The British Secret Service was expanded, MI5 and MI6 were recruiting new staff, and two of the Cambridge Five were right in the middle of it all. Donald Maclean entered the Foreign Service, the diplomatic corps of the British government. In this newfound position, Maclean had access to top-secret political plans during World War II. However, Guy Burgess would be the first of the five to successfully compromise the British Secret Service. Guy Burgess was recruited by MI6 as a propagandist, an expert in radio. While he was working for the Secret Service, MI5 also recruited him so they could use his influence in the homosexual community to recruit and run new agents. Burgess, being a graduate from Cambridge, was highly valued by both the British and the Soviets for his intellect, and his eccentric nature was highly valued. Many would think that such an eccentric individual would be detrimental to a spying operation, because, well, such an outgoing and boisterous individual would surely be unable to keep his mouth shut about clandestine operations. But it was that exact mindset that allowed him to fly under the radar. MI6 was Britain's top secret agency. The secrecy that was inherent with this job made it hard for the agency to find valid and trustworthy recruits. This made it easy for Burgess to recommend Kim Philby. The recommendation of an already trusted agent would definitely give an inherent trust within the organization. Philby's first assignment in the British Secret Service was in Section D, a new division designed to help defeat the Germans through secret missions and propaganda. Philby was tasked with training recruits in the uses of propaganda. And while fulfilling his duty, he gathered secret information from MI6 files that he had unprecedented access to. He went line by line on these files, carefully noting European contacts and handing this information over to the KGB. Thanks to Philby, the Soviets knew the identity of nearly all the MI6 agents operating around the world. Even with all of the important information provided by Philby, it was John Cairncross who gave the Soviets the most important secrets of the war. Cairncross's math expertise landed him a job at Bletchley Park. Bletchley Park was the principal center of Allied code breaking during the Second World War. The estate housed the government code and cipher school, which regularly penetrated the secret communications of the Axis powers. Most importantly, the German Enigma and Lorenz ciphers. According to the official historian of British intelligence, the ultra-intelligence produced at Bletchley shortened the war by 2 to 4 years, and without it, the outcome of the war would have been uncertain. The decrypted German communications were the most closely guarded secrets of the war, and Cairncross had uninhibited access to these ciphers, codes, and messages, and he passed all of this information directly back to the Soviets. John Cairncross was able to supply decrypted ciphers that mapped out German troop movements on the Eastern Front. He is widely credited as having made a very significant contribution to the Battle of Kursk. The Battle of Kursk was a major battle between German and Soviet forces on the Eastern Front near Kursk in the Soviet Union. The Germans hoped to weaken the Soviet offensive potential for the summer of 1943 by cutting off and enveloping the forces that they anticipated would be in the Kursk salient. Hitler believed that a victory here would reassert German strength and improve his prestige with his allies, whom he thought were considering withdrawing from the war. The information given to the Soviets by Cairncross told the Russians where the German airfields were on the Eastern Front. This allowed the Soviets to bomb these airfields prior to the battle and secure their victory at Kursk. But not all is well between the Cambridge Five and the Russians. Stalin was very paranoid. He didn't trust all of the information being given to him, and in turn, the agency that evaluated intelligence coming from the Five was greatly infected with Stalin's paranoia. Why did the paranoia set in? Well, the reports coming from the Cambridge Five at the time showed that Britain didn't have any military operations directed towards the Soviet Union. Stalin couldn't believe this, and this paranoid mindset was widespread in the KGB. This paranoia led the Soviets to believe that the Cambridge Five, and Philby in particular, were deceiving them with their reports. However, even with this paranoia, the KGB continued to take information from the Cambridge Five. And because of this information, Joseph Stalin had access to classified information about both his enemies and his allies, including secrets about the British atomic program. And as the war is winding down, this information becomes invaluable to the Soviets, because after World War II, the Cold War is getting into full swing, and the Cambridge Five are starting to get nervous about no longer spying for what's considered an ally, but now they're spying for the enemy. By the late 1940s, McLean, Burgess, and Cairncross all held high-ranking positions in governmental agencies. Kim Philby is the only one who stayed in the British Secret Service. Philby's experience during World War II caught the attention of a man named Stuart Mengus. Mengus was so impressed with Philby's resume that he put him in charge of Section 9. Section 9, ironically enough, was a branch of MI6 that was in charge of planning counter-espionage measures against the Soviet Union. However, with Philby directly in charge of this organization, the Soviets were able to dodge every operation that was mounted against them, aided, of course, with information from Philby himself. While Philby was working with Section 9, McLean and Burgess worked at the Foreign Office, stealing classified plans about Britain's strategies during the Cold War. Burgess was sent to France while McLean was posted over in Washington, D.C. At the end of the war, Britain and America began planning their strategy to combat and contain the Soviet Union. Donald McLean obviously had considerable access to political decision-making that was very important to the Soviets. During this time, McLean made frequent trips to New York to meet his handler so that he could turn over information about the Cold War to the Soviets. As a cover for his frequent visits, he visited his wife, an American, living with her mother in Manhattan. But even with this cover story, friends and family of McLean started to notice that he was acting strange. The pressure of living this life of espionage and deceit was starting to get to him. He began to drink heavily, and those around him started to get suspicious because of this irrational behavior. This weighed heavily on the minds of all of the Cambridge Five, because they knew that the punishment for treason could be death. McLean, however, was not the first to crack. It was actually Anthony Blunt that led the pressure get to him. Anthony Blunt was so close to breaking down that the KGB actually allowed him to forego his full-time spying and move to a more part-time position. He would no longer provide a constant stream of information to the Soviets, but instead, he would act as a middleman between the Soviets and Guy Burgess. With Anthony Blunt being out of MI5, he was no longer under the watchful eye of the British government. This made it much easier for him to meet with the Soviets. And because he was a lifelong friend with Burgess, nobody batted an eye when they would meet either. This made him the perfect candidate to be the courier for most, if not all, of Burgess's intelligence to the Soviets during this time. Meanwhile, tensions were also rising in Korea. The Soviets believed that America would risk war between China and themselves to protect Korea from communism. However, through the intelligence gathered by the Cambridge Five, it was clear that America did not want to go to war with the Soviets, and they knew just how far America was willing to go to protect Korea. But the intelligence doesn't stop there. John Cairncross was foundational in uncovering secrets of Britain's atomic program. He was working with the Ministry of Supply, and while he was there, he had access to a safe containing the plans for Britain's nuclear weapon. Using the plans supplied by Cairncross, Soviet scientists were able to recreate some of the materials required to build an atomic bomb of their own. After nearly 10 years of espionage, it became second nature to the Cambridge Five. Some of them started to even become apathetic when checking for surveillance around them. They had passed information along so many times that they didn't feel the need to look over their shoulder anymore. But for Donald McLean, that couldn't be further from the truth, and the pressure became more than he could bear. He was transferred from Washington, D.C. to the British Embassy in Cairo, Egypt. And this is where McLean finally broke. He began drinking, brawling, and even talking about his double life. One drunken episode led McLean to destroying the apartment of two secretaries of the American Embassy. However, after a brief stay at the hospital, McLean was not punished, but instead he was promoted. The Crown saw this outburst as a side effect of McLean being so hardworking and his intense devotion to his country. This promotion brought McLean back to London to head the American department in the British Foreign Office. At this time, Kim Philby was sent to Washington, D.C. as an MI6 liaison to the American Secret Service. Around the same time, Burgess was also transferred to D.C. He decided to move in with Philby and his family. Little did they know, this decision would lead to their downfall. The beginning of the end for the Cambridge Five came in the early 1950s. During World War II, messages from Soviet embassies in the West were routinely intercepted by American intelligence. But the time-consuming process of decoding these secret messages made progress slow. However, with the Cold War ramping up, Americans wanted to know what was in these old communications. So America decided to devote more resources and time into the Venona Project. The Venona Project was a United States counterintelligence program initiated during World War II by the United States Army Signals Intelligence Service. It was intended to decrypt messages transmitted by the intelligence agencies of the Soviet Union. Initiated when the Soviet Union was an ally of the U.S., the program continued well into the Cold War, when it was considered an enemy. Kim Philby's position as MI6 liaison presented him with access to the progress of the Venona Project. And although code breaking was a slow process, important information about Soviet agents were starting to become uncovered. One such agent, with the codename Homer, started showing up in these messages, along with important details about who this person may be. After seeing the correspondence, Philby immediately discerned that Homer was none other than his friend, Donald McLean. Knowing it was only a matter of time before McLean was discovered, Philby and Burgess had to find a way to warn him. The only problem was that McLean was on the other side of the ocean in London, and any direct communication would surely blow their own cover. The plan they came up with was simple: get fired and sent home. So Guy Burgess got in a car and broke speed limits across 3 states. And every time he was pulled over, he was rude to the arresting officers. He was unruly, arrogant, and claimed diplomatic immunity for each infraction. This eventually got to the governors of all 3 states, who then complained to the State Department. The State Department then complained to the embassy about Burgess's behavior. Burgess was promptly told to leave Washington, D.C. and go home. After Burgess was able to get back in London, he was able to meet with McLean and warn him about what the Americans were uncovering. At this time, it was clear that McLean would have to defect to the Soviet Union. McLean would never be able to hold up to interrogation in his current mental state, and it was clear that he would be unable to escape alone. So Burgess decided to help his friend escape. He booked a weekend cruise across the Channel to France, and from there, the two were able to make their way to Moscow. To this day, only the KGB knows the exact route they took to get from France to Moscow. McLean's defection surprised the secret services of America and Britain, but Burgess's defection, that shocked everyone, including Kim Philby. This was never part of the plan. Philby was horrified that Burgess defected with McLean, because this was the act that ended the spying career of Kim Philby. His friendship with Burgess instantly made Philby a suspect. Philby had to act quickly. He did not want his home to be searched, and for the Secret Service to find his cameras and other communications equipment. So he bundled it all in a bag, buried it in the woods somewhere where no one would ever find it. Interestingly, investigators turned to Philby and Burgess's lifelong friend, Anthony Blunt, to gain entry into their home for a search. Little did they know that Blunt was also spying for the KGB. And during the search, Blunt was able to go through Burgess's desk at the Philby home and retrieve some of the incriminating documents that occupied the space. Unfortunately for the remaining members of the Cambridge Five, Blunt missed one very important document, one that was not written in Burgess's handwriting. This clue documented a lunch with a British civil servant. When investigators were able to track down that individual, they learned that the other person at the lunch was none other than one John Cairncross. They cross-checked the document with documents that were known to be written by Cairncross. The handwriting was a perfect match. So from that moment on, Cairncross's career as a lifelong spy was over. However, Cairncross was never prosecuted because the burden of proof of treason was too high in Britain for authorities to formally charge him. During this time, Kim Philby was still living under a cloud of suspicion. He was sent back to London, and throughout the 1950s he lived in limbo, carefully watched by the British Secret Service. Officially, Philby was persona non grata, or rather, effectively banned at MI6. However, Philby's luck was not over yet. Marcus Lipton was a member of Parliament at the time, and acting on a tip from a secret source, he accused Philby of being a spy. Philby then took advantage of Britain's laws against libel and demanded either proof of his espionage or a public apology from Parliament. This forced the government to make a statement that effectively exonerated Philby, because at the time, they had no evidence against him. After the exoneration, Philby held a press conference where he used the situation to reintegrate into the newspaper community in Britain. After his reintegration, he was assigned to Beirut as a journalist. Little did he know that in Beirut is where his luck was finally about to come to an end. In December of 1962, MI5 discovered evidence that implicated Philby as a key member of the Cambridge spy ring. Working together, MI5 and MI6 sent a representative to Beirut to confront Philby, and this time he finally broke, admitting that he had spied for the Soviets. Philby was interrogated on a Friday, and by Saturday he had already disappeared. There's some mystery about how Philby was exfiltrated, but the most widely accepted theory is that he had a meeting with a Soviet handler who took Philby down to the docks, put him on a Soviet ship, and then sailed to Odessa. While Philby, Burgess, and McLean were all in the Soviet Union, Anthony Blunt had become a respected art critic back in London. In the 1960s, Blunt struck a secret deal with MI5. They were certain that Blunt was obviously part of this Cambridge ring, but they couldn't prove it. So MI5 offered him immunity if he would divulge the secrets of the Cambridge Five. In 1979, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher discovered Blunt's deal with MI5. She exposed him in the House of Commons, and the Queen promptly stripped him of his knighthood. John Cairncross lived out his life in Italy and France. He was the last man to be revealed, the fifth man of the Cambridge Five.
Can you say whether you ever passed any secrets?
That is a matter on which I could only reply no comment. There were certain accusations against me, certain evidence. That was examined, and no action was taken. I am entirely unable to add to these because certain rather delicate issues are involved.
Kim Philby died in Moscow in 1988. He was buried with full military honors in Konsevo Cemetery, along with many other Soviet war heroes. To this day, there are still many things that are not known about the Cambridge Five. Much of the files regarding the investigation are classified, along with the KGB files on the spies. But even without knowing the full story, The Cambridge Five still go down in history as one of the most successful spy rings of all time. And even though all of these men definitely committed treason, not a single one was ever charged. They would never have to face the consequences for the crimes that they had committed, the lies that they had told, or the secrets that they had divulged to the Soviets and to the KGB. Thank you for watching.